Hi, this is Randy. Ladies and gentlemen, I have finally found my diagnosis after about 7 years of going through the before math and aftermath of this narcissistic abuse. And I'd like to read it to you. Many of you will relate. It's very nice to finally see that the psychiatric and psychological profession has identified what's wrong with me, and it is similar to PTSD, but it's explained extremely well, extremely specific, and it's specific to how sex addiction-induced trauma affects our psyches. So I'm going to begin reading. This is probably going to go into 2 to 3 parts, but it's worth it. So hold on to your hats. This was found in the instituteforsexualhealth.com website. And the article, if you can call it an article, it's a study, 13 Dimensions of Sex Addiction-Induced Trauma, which is called SAIT for short, among partners and spouses impacted by sex addiction. So as you're listening, don't confuse this with being related to the sex addict and the sex addict's problems. This is about the problems encountered by the partner and spouse of a sex addict. This study is by Dr. Omar Minwalla from the Institute for Sexual Health, and it's dated April 2014, so it's no wonder that I was not aware of it, because this was happening to me before April 2014. The sex addiction-induced trauma model articulates 13 dimensions of trauma relevant to the clinical impacts, injury, and symptoms among intimate partners of sex addicts, based on both qualitative research and clinical application with partners and spouses impacted by sex addiction and compulsivity. Each dimension is a cluster of traumatic impacts, traumatic processes, and post-traumatic symptom sequences. Not all clusters or dimensions may be relevant for every partner or spouse. Trauma is subjective, and individuals are completely different and unique. Dr. Omar Minwalla first studied sexual trauma among partners in 2005 and 2006. From 2008 to 2009, that's when my trauma started. Sylvia Jackson, MFT, CSAT, joined Dr. Minwalla and authored the first 7 dimensions in concept, along with articulating emotional abuse and specifically gaslighting in a sex addiction, compulsivity, and partner and spouse trauma context. Dr. Minwalla and the Institute for Sexual Health went on to further develop and refine the 13 dimensions of sex addiction-induced trauma among partners and spouses through direct clinical application and grounded theory research methodology. And that didn't occur until 2012. The following is derived from the victim's perspective. from the bottom looking up, not just from the top looking down. The 13 dimensions of sex addiction-induced trauma among immediate partners and spouses impacted by sex addiction compulsivity are: number 1, discovery trauma; number 2, disclosure trauma; number 3, reality ego fragmentation; number 4, impact to body and medical intersection; number 5, external crisis and destabilization; number 6, sex addiction-induced trauma, hypervigilance, and re-experiencing; number 7, dynamics of perpetration, violation, and abuse; number 8, sexual trauma; number 9, gender wounds and gender-based trauma; number 10, relational trauma and attachment injuries; number 11, family, communal, and social injuries; number 12, treatment-induced trauma; and number 13, existential and spiritual trauma. I'm going to read in detail about each one of these types of trauma that are all part of sex addiction-induced trauma. And these are experienced by the partner of the sex addict. Now, many of your narcissists are indeed sex addicts. They just have not been diagnosed as such because they won't go get treatment. Number 1, discovery trauma. Dimension 1 is discovery trauma, which is defined as the traumatic intrusions and resulting post-traumatic symptoms from the intersection of the partner's pre-existing reality ego with the deceptive sexual relational compartmentalized reality system. Discovery is a critical traumatic incident or event, as well as an ongoing traumatic process and system. To reduce the clinical conceptualization of discovery trauma to a singular traumatic episode is often diagnostically incomplete and inaccurate, and serves to diminish both reality and the actual traumatic experience of the partner. The impact of a discovery includes ego-reality turbulence, disturbances, and ultimate ego-reality fragmentation. Originally described as a, quote, shattered self in the context of partners, a discovery induces the experience of reality incongruence, which destabilizes ego structures on which psychological stability, organization, and function depend and are based. The change in ego structures causes or, quote, induces fear into the system, as often occurs when important structures or functions of the ego are threatened. Thus, a discovery introduces fear into the psychological system, often inducing flight, freeze, or flee mechanisms based in human survival. The induction of fear into the psychological and relational system is one of the specific traumatic symptom processes of discovery trauma. A discovery does not in any way mean a full awareness of reality or the truth for the partner or spouse. It means a degree of awareness that there is reality incongruence and the open possibilities of a deceptive, compartmentalized sexual or relational system with no ability to confirm the extent or the nature. This can often induce severe panic, terror, and intense fear, horror, or helplessness. It opens up an entire world of actual possibility with no reliable source of reality, as it has been systematically denied and withheld from the intimate partner with intention. It is important to consider every single discovery as a trauma-inducing event and different than any other discovery incident. A partner will often experience multiple and various forms of discovery trauma incidents and processes, sometimes hundreds. As with all traumatic incidents that repeat many times and have a similar theme, this constitutes a form of complex PTSD and will often induce many symptoms of complex PTSD well before any initial disclosure, often causing symptoms covertly in an intimate partner for years. Thus, many partners impacted by sex addiction compulsivity disorders experience both PTSD events and also CPTSD symptom systems as part of discovery trauma in a sex addiction-induced trauma clinical context. It is important to note that what occurs and ensues after a discovery incident, or what does not happen after a discovery incident, for example, defensive techniques that constitute forms of emotional abuse, is also related to the traumatic experience of discovery trauma. This discovery trauma is both discovery incidents and processes that may exist over many years. How fear is metabolized and how the sex addict compulsive may or may not respond, particularly in terms of abusive responses in the various contexts of relational rupture, will impact traumatic process and symptomatology significantly. The configurations of traumatic discovery experiences can vary. Discovery can be a first awareness, a slow evolving consciousness, or an intuitive sense. It may involve a subtle awareness of reality incongruence, the induction of fear involved in discovery trauma can be an evolution process, like, quote, a drop of ink in water. Discovery trauma can also often be a sudden and direct collision of the partner's pre-existing ego reality with the sex addiction compulsive's deceptive compartmentalized reality, quote, like a car accident, often constituting an actual traumatic event, inducing PTSD around a single episode, with the ensuing aftermath constituting the resultant complex trauma and the CPTSD symptoms. Discovery trauma requires clinical intervention and specificity that supports the necessary indicated clinical metabolism and regulation of traumatic memory toward ego reality reformation and relational safety. So I've only read number 1, and we are ending this video, and I will continue on to the different parts of this article in the next upcoming videos to help you understand the kinds of trauma you have been dealing with possibly for years. Thank you for listening.